National Signing Day. You guys, you both, you like the recruiting, following the recruiting and all that good stuff?
I like to follow the Oklahoma kids. Yeah, I like to see where they're going, and I wish we kept more of them. It seems like every year we're losing more and more kids to. And I know we're going to break this down, but Arkansas in particular, I think they had 6 Oklahoma kids signees this year, and so there's some of those kids that get away that you'd like to see stay in state, but I like to follow it. I think it's fun. Then you can follow them, for the next 4 or 5 years and see how they do. And one of the things, a kid that was highly recruited out of Carl Albert years ago went to Texas Tech, talking about
Trayvon Porter.
And now he's on the coaching staff at Choctaw. So we got to see him as a player in high school. Then we got to see him go play college where he started multiple years. And now he's back coaching on the sidelines in a state championship game. So that was pretty cool. So it's fun to, I think, connect those dots and you kind of just get to follow the kids and see how they're doing.
Casey, 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars, Oklahoma kids, OSU. Yeah. How do you approach it?
But, when you have continuity like Oklahoma State's had, which you have to have at a place like Oklahoma State, to have a consistent winner year in and year out, which is the formula Mike Gundy's put together, you put together a system of not necessarily stars and rankings, but you put together a system of the type of athlete that fits into the schematics of the way that you do things, the system and the way that you do things. There's only about a 25% chance that any one given recruit that you recruit actually will be a contributor as far as on the field consistently for your program, because you're talking about kids that don't make the grades. You're talking about kids that get homesick and want to go back home closer to mom and dad. And then you talk about another quarter of the kids that just simply aren't as talented as maybe you thought they were when you evaluated them. So I think when you stay closer to home, you have a better idea of the type of fit they would be for your program. So this is a big year in state for recruiting for Oklahoma kids. And it kind of reminds me of why Oklahoma State really needs OU to be really good in football for OSU to be better. And that is because the better Oklahoma is, the more local recruits there's going to be available for OSU to get. If OU, like say in the mid 90s, that's the worst case scenario for OSU recruiting, because now OU's dipping into that high 3-star, the .886 type kid like Dominique Stevens, for instance. And now instead of getting that kid, OSU's having to dip down a level below that. So I think OU's recent success and the way that they're recruiting specifically nationally definitely benefited Oklahoma State in-state. And then kind of the trickle down to that is that OSU struggled enough lately to where, and Arkansas as well, that they've taken all of the in-state kids away from Tulsa. So I think Tulsa now needs Arkansas to get really good, where they can recruit more on a national basis, where they're not plucking the Tulsa, Washington kids. I know there's a kid from Wagner going to Texas Tech. And so I think with Arkansas now making a resurgence, but still not good enough to recruit on a national level, the recruiting strategy that Mike Gundy has put in place, I think that's hurt Tulsa the most this year in state. So I think this is a fantastic in-state year for recruiting. I think OSU made a good haul with 3 or 4 particular players that they really need. A really good wide receiver from Norman, 2 really good linebackers, a couple of really good offensive linemen, and then, of course, Oklahoma had the fantastic recruiting class as well.
Yeah, and we're about to break those down here in just a second for each school as well as out-of-state. But, Phil, we'll break down this list here in just a little bit. But we've saw so many great Oklahoma high school players this year, and a lot of them obviously not able to play Division I football. It just shows you how there's a handful of Division I kids that come out of the state of Oklahoma. It's a good high school football season compared to others. It's not great, but it's still a good high school football season. And there's players like Luke Tarman will not be on the list for OU or OSU, but there's so many good kids out in high school football. We've seen a lot of them over the last several weeks and over the season.
Well, and I think this is probably going to offend a few people, but I think that's why it's important to help your kids have realistic expectations on where they can end up playing. I think, if you play football or baseball or basketball or soccer or any sport you play, if you're really competitive, then it's natural at some point in your life to say, man, I'd really like to go play big time college sports in my chosen sport. But if you're 5'10" and you weigh $180 and you're a junior and a senior and you play linebacker, you're not going to play Division I football. I mean, it's not going to happen. If you're 5'11" and you're 195, 200 pounds and you play tight end in high school, you're not going to play Division I football at that position. I mean, it's not going to happen. And so I think one thing that National Signing Day always makes me remember is I wish we would help kids better understand that I know everybody wants to go D1. When you're a 13-year-old kid, that's all you talk about. But at some point, you got to get realistic with yourself and realize if there's cats out there like Luke Tarman, who was the best player in 5A this year, that got 0 Division I offers, right? And he was the best player in 5A. And he's 6 foot, 6'1", 185 pounds. It's tough to get an offer at the D1 level. And so, hopefully kids will be realistic. But I got to say this, we're going to break it down. As a guy that has rooted for the team in Stillwater for a long time, I'm sick and tired of finishing 36th in the recruiting class, 46th in the recruiting class. I mean, it's getting old because until we can go out and get better Jimmies and Joes, it's awful tough to compete at the highest level. And so I think OSU had a good in-state recruiting class, but again, they find themselves around 40 in the country again in recruiting class and third in the Big 12. They seem to always finish third or fourth in the Big 12. With Iowa State coming up, I think if O State doesn't do some things differently, and I think it's going to be tougher for Mike Gundy to recruit off the field stuff this year than it was previously. I'm not saying I agree with it or I disagree with it. I'm just simply saying it's going to be tougher to go into some of these areas of the country and recruit effectively because I think there was some tarnish put on Gundy's cape on the off season. So, it's if you're an O State fan, I think you're happy with the in-state recruits, but I think you're disappointed overall in where we fell again, kind of middle of the road in Division I, and that's not good.
And just to finish off real quick, Phil, you mentioned Luke Tarman, another great quarterback in 5A football. Ben Harris, who would be a candidate for 5A Player of the Year as well. He would get some first place votes, but Ben Harris won 52 high school football games, 4 state championships. Now he hasn't. Probably not going to play football. His career is probably in baseball, but that just shows you can have all the stats and numbers and all that stuff. But what a career! We're talking about Ben Harrison Carl right here in a little bit. But let's go ahead and take a look at the University of Oklahoma signing. Again, we're taking a look at Oklahoma high school prospects that come out of the state of Oklahoma and the Sooners. And Casey, you alluded to it a little bit earlier. The Sooners going a little bit more national, more so than years past. But Oklahoma signed Ethan Downs and Jordan Mukes, Weatherford High School for Ethan and Jordan Mukes for Choctaw. But Phil, you were able to see both of these players. Give us your initial thoughts on Ethan Downs and Jordan Mukes.
Well, the thing that jumps off the board with Ethan Downs is he's a big kid. He's 6'4", 6'5", 240, 245 pounds, coming out of high school, and he's real athletic. Chris, if you remember last year when we called that state championship game with them, he's got about size 18 feet. So, I mean, he's going to be, my point is he's really long, and I think he could get even bigger. I don't think the kid's necessarily done growing, but a real athletic kid. I don't know where he was ranked in the state. I think he was 7th in the state, according to some places, had offers from Penn State, LSU. I mean, all the big schools he had offers from, and chose to stay in the state of Oklahoma. And I think he'll be a heck of a player for OU if he continues to put on weight and get bigger. But he's definitely coming out of high school a great get for the Sooners, no doubt about it. And the Mukes kid, we saw him against Bixby, extremely athletic. There was a couple plays where Presley breaks away and he can fly.
Yeah.
And you're going, okay, here's golden goalpost. And the Mukes kid took the perfect angle. That coupled with his speed, he was able to keep Presley out of the end zone on 2 different long runs. I mean, the kid's, he's got a high, if you know how to take the right angles and just watching him, he's got a real high football IQ. He's very physical. He's big. He's long. I think he's a guy that'll be a player for OU, and it'll be a multi-year starter, and and the sky's the limit for him.
Yeah, I think eventually, for Mukes, I think he might move over to the safety spot. They got to put a lot of a weight on him and some muscles on him, but I don't think he'll make an immediate impression at University of Oklahoma. But over the years, it's definitely a name we can definitely hear in the defensive backfield.
I think he's a kid to be like a redshirt sophomore, might get into the starting lineup as a redshirt sophomore, but he's so big framed. If you recall, I mean, he's a huge framed kid.
Mm-hmm. Long arms.
It's not out of the possibility he gets in there and he really takes to the weights and the training table. I don't think it's out of the possibility that kid might end up playing outside linebacker at OU. I mean, because he's big, fast, he's got a good football IQ. I mean, I think he can do a lot of things. So a lot of it's going to depend on what his body ends up looking like, but he's a legit player, no doubt about it.
Casey, your thoughts on the Sooners? Again, you kind of mentioned there earlier, Sooners going more nationals. Again, only 2 in-state kids at this time, and the Sooners class, again, one of the top ones in the nation. They got a few players they're still waiting on here. One of the top running backs in the nation still hasn't committed. So, but as far as Oklahoma players, it looks like the 2 and done for the Sooners.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off of Phil's comment a minute ago, not only if you have aspirations of your kid being a Division I athlete, I think what this recruiting class for OU this year showed, if you have aspirations of your kid being recruited by OU, you better be pretty realistic in terms of how good they have to be to go to OU. And I will say this, and I say this as an Oklahoma State fan, and I agree with you, Phil. I am not happy where the Oklahoma State recruiting is at. There has been too large of an investment made in football to be finishing in the 35s and the 40s. And if you look at, and not just being in the 35 or 40s, Phil, look at the teams that are finishing ahead of OSU, the Illinois of the world and the Cincinnatis, in places like that. There's no reason for places like that to recruit better than Oklahoma State. Now, having said that, I will say this. I do think this strategy for OU, specifically Lincoln Riley, has some pitfalls to it. I think you have to be careful if you're OU, because I think Oklahoma State and now Texas Tech, as we see them pluck a kid or 2 from Oklahoma, Baylor plucks some kids, Arkansas, you're now developing a region of teams that are full of kids on their roster that really the only thing that they want to do in the world is beat OU because they were snubbed by OU. So not only do these kids want to beat OU for the fact that they're OU, they want to beat OU because they weren't recruited by OU. Kind of like when a kid from Baylor plays the University of Texas. Does that make sense to you? So although it's a great thing that for OU that they're able to recruit nationally, I do think it is a mistake not to recruit locally more than they are. I could be wrong. I think we'll see how that goes, but that's a situation to where I will be interested to see how that plays out in the coming years.
All I'll say to that, Casey, is it sure hasn't bared to be true yet. You still got to go play, because OSU's beat OU how many times in the series? Yeah. Is it even at 20 yet?
Less under Gundy than the actual series itself.
I mean, but my point is that OU, because of their success, because of their name, because of their brand, because they've had 3 guys that play quarterback that were either won the Heisman or were a Heisman finalist in a row. Now you got a kid at quarterback that's going to be there eventually. I mean, he's going to be a Heisman finalist if he doesn't win. But my point is this: they don't have to recruit in Oklahoma. They can go get the best. They can go get the best players out of Texas, the best players out of Florida, the best players out of California. OSU can't do that. And
I agree. What I'm trying to say is, instead of, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
No. I think it's the difference between, and this is coming from an O-State guy. Okay, yeah. I think it's the difference between. I mean, listen. the college football coaches and their staff's first job is recruiting. That's their first job. You got to get them on campus before you got to get them on campus. If you can't get them on campus, it doesn't matter. And I think there's a lot of frustration felt by a lot of people in Cowboy Nation out there that finishing third or fourth every year isn't good enough in the Big 12. Yeah. And I think until OSU can go out and recruit some of those more great out-of-state kids, I mean, I think that's where we're going to be.
I think what I'm trying to say is instead of focusing on the times that OSU didn't beat OU, which is 93% of the time because OU's better than OSU almost every year, if you look at the times where OSU was able to beat OU, look at the roster and how it was comprised. Rashawn Woods, Billy Badgema, Josh Fields, Brandon Whedon, Justin Blackman, Tracy Moore, Badgema, all of those guys that were snubbed by OU, that whenever they had a team that was good enough to beat OU, not only do they want to beat OU because they're OU, but they wanted to beat OU because they got snubbed by that university. So that's kind of the angle I'm looking at. And let me say this about Oklahoma State recruiting. I'm not saying I agree with it, but here is the pivot that Mike Gundy made about 7 or 8 years ago. He was going after the 4 or 5 star recruits, Herschel Sims, Nick Starkel, the kid that ended up going to Texas A&M. There were 3 or 4, the Ronald Jones that ended up going to USC. And OSU was landing some of these 4 or 5 star recruits. Dexter Pratt, if you remember him. And then what was happening is at the last minute, OU, USC, all of these schools were coming in and swiping these players out from underneath them literally the night before the recruiting class was set to be put in paper. And so then OSU was left with no other options other than to go get high or low 2-star players. So what Mike Gundy's done, instead of going after those guys that even if you get them to commit, you don't even know if they're going to sign the day that they're supposed to sign, he's gone after the solid to high 3-star kids that he knows if he gets them committed, that they will come to campus. They're not going to pull the rug out at the end of the day. And what he also thinks, and he's done this from time to time, the difference between a 3-star kid and a 4-star kid is that a 4-star kid, as you mentioned, will probably get to play for 3 years. A 2-star kid like Cole Walterscheid from Munster, Texas, ended up being a 4-star player, but for only 1 year of his career. It took him 4 years of college training to become a 4-star player. Whereas if you get a 4-star out of high school, they're more ready to go, and you're going to get 3 or 4 years of 4-star production out of them. So the way that Mike Gundy is recruiting is going to give you a chance every 3 or 4 years to develop a group into 4-star players through your training, have that one shot like this year was supposed to be to win it, and then rebuild. Whereas the way that OU is able to do it, you're able to reload every year.
Let's go ahead and take a look.
That's my whole, just to finish it up though, that's my whole point though. They take a shot at it. They're not getting it done. And I think people are getting frustrated with that.
Right. I agree.
Well, let's take a look at the signing class for the Oklahoma State Cowboys for as far as in-state players are concerned. And top of the list there, Jaden Bray, wide receiver out of Norman High School. So the Cowboys go into Norman once again and get a player there. Jaden Bray. Aiden Kelly, someone we'll be talking about here in a little bit, from Thomas High School, defensive lineman. Logan Nobles, offensive lineman from Jinx High School. Colin Oliver, Phil will have a lot to say about him here in a little bit, defensive lineman at Edmond Santa Fe. Mikael Smith, defensive back from Midwest City High School. Donovan Stevens, not too far, at Dell City High School, both on the defensive side. Logan Ward, it will be a walk-on, but they were really wanting him as their kicking duties. And then finally, Ty Williams, a defensive back out of Muskogee High School, a player that got hurt early on in the season, Phil, and really didn't get to see him play throughout the year. And Muskogee did not win a football game. And you would certainly think if Ty Williams was playing this year, there had been a few more wins in Muskogee. But nonetheless, those are the players in state for the Oklahoma State Cowboys.
Yeah, and I think, you look at the class from top to bottom as far as the in-state kids, which is what we're looking at here. I think they went out and got kids that they need. You got this Bray kid out of Norman, I think is a sleeper that could be a phenomenal. He's a big kid. He's 6'3", 190, 195, had a lot of offers from a lot of big-time programs. I think it also the fact that he's in Norman and he's going to OSU. OU didn't even really recruit him. Now, there could be a variety of reasons for that. Maybe everybody knows he has no interest in going to Norman. He wants to get out of town and, go away. It could also be that OU's so stacked at wide receiver right now, they didn't offer him. Who knows? But he's an outstanding prospect. The kid from Thomas, I'm going to let you break him down a little bit more because when we talk about the Thomas Cashin matchup coming up, we saw the Nobles kid 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago when Jinx played Edmond Santa Fe in the finals. Big kid, what you would expect. The Oliver kid is in my opinion, is the best signee they've got in this class. I think he's got a ton. We saw him be double teamed the entire day against a very, very good Jinx team, including a Jinx offensive line that has a kid that's going to OSU, the Nobles kid. He was double teamed all day and still had 12, 13 tackles on the day. I mean, he's a big physical athletic kid. I think he's the class of their signing class. The Smith kid, don't know a lot about him. I'm going to let Casey kind of break him down a little bit more, but anybody he's coming out of Midwest City High School, the defensive back, OSU needed to go get a couple defensive backs, and they did that between the Williams kid and the Smith kid. I think the Williams kid probably would grade out a little higher at the defensive back position. And the Williams kid, if you talk to Keaton Collins, who coached the Williams kid, he was on the staff at Muskogee. I said, how does he compare to some of the guys that I know? And he just looked at me and grinned and said he's special. Yeah. He's the real deal because he's comparing him to guys, around here, the way I asked him to, like Kai Staley, and who was also on the staff then, who spoke highly of the Williams kid, Josh King. We've had some great defensive backs over the years that Keaton played with. And I think he would put the Williams kid at the highest level of any of those guys. So, in state, like Casey said, I think it was a really solid, good recruiting class. In state, it's better than OU, obviously, in state. But I think that's more of I think that's more because OSU needs to recruit in state. And I don't want to offend a bunch of my friends. I love Oklahoma high school football as much as anybody out there. But the truth is if you're getting a bulk of your recruits from in-state, when you're signing 8 kids like we did today, usually means you're not going out and getting some of the kids you wanted in other areas of the country also. Because Oklahoma high school football is not at the level, obviously, of Texas or Florida or California or there's a lot, Pennsylvania. There's a lot of states out there, Georgia. There are other states, Louisiana. So we're just not at that level. And what I mean by that isn't that we don't have some great high school football players. We do. We just don't have the number of great high school football players those other states have, simply because of population and just numbers. But a really good class for Oklahoma State. I think it's kind of what you expected. We got to remember too, Gunnar Gundy, while he was a senior last year, he's going to be coming in with this freshman class. So he's going to actually be coming in with this class because he took a year off of college. He's been working with personal trainers and coaches this COVID year. But he technically will be he will be a freshman with these group of kids coming in. So they do have a quarterback as well coming in who's a very good high school quarterback. We'll see what kind of development he had this year, where that ends up taking him. But, there is a quarterback in that class as well.
Casey, your thoughts on the Cowboys?
Yeah, the cornerback from Midwest City, Mikhail Smith, that his name? Yeah, Mikhail Smith. He intrigues me. I've seen him 2 or 3 times, and what intrigues me about him is the way that Jim Knowles has transitioned into that LSU defense. I don't want to get geeky in how they run it, but it's basically man coverage for cornerbacks. And so what they've transitioned to, if you look at OSU corners, Rodarius Williams, A.J. Green, Christian Holmes, the transfer from Missouri this year, the grad transfer, and now Mikhail Smith, they're looking at cornerbacks that basically fit a profile. This kid fits all of them. He's 6 foot. He's 195 pounds. He flips his hips. He knows how to run. He's a ball hawking corner. This is the type of kid, again, that Oklahoma State does such a good job of not looking at recruiting stars. I think he's like a composite 84, which is middle of the road 3-star, nothing to be excited about unless you really fit the skills that this kid brings to what Oklahoma State is doing defensively with their corners, and realizing that this kid absolutely fits the bill. And then the other kid that I'm super excited about is the Del City kid that I think he's listed as a outside linebacker, maybe Donovan Stevens. He reminds me of Malcolm Rodriguez in that type of, okay, what are you going to do with him when you get him on campus? Are you going to slender him up and make him one of those half players, that kind of star player where he's half run, half pass? Are you going to make him a full-time box linebacker? Are you going to make him a long and lanky safety in the form of say, a Daytwan Lowe? I think a Dominique Stevens type kid is the exact kind of kid that Oklahoma State needs, because he can fill a need in 2 or 3 different places on a defense as far as what you want to turn him into. So very excited about those 2 young men. And I know, Phil, you're very, very high on the Edmond Santa Fe linebacker. I've seen him a couple of times. I still think that there's a chance that he could end up being a defensive end type player.
That could be.
He's going to be an in-the-box linebacker. But again,
well, I think it depends. It depends on what his body does, right? I mean, and that's the caveat you got to put on all these kids. Just like the young man you're talking about right now from Del City, he's 6 foot 205, which really means he's 5'11", 195, and so he's, what does he do physically? I mean, what's he going to do physically?
To me,
the Mikael Smith
Rodriguez
kid. Yeah, and that could be. That absolutely could be. But like the Smith kid you're talking about, I know you say he's 190. Everywhere I'm looking has him listed at 165. Now, I'm not saying that. I mean, they could all be wrong. I haven't seen the kid, but even if he is 165 at corner, the big thing is he's 6 foot tall. And if you're 6 foot tall or taller at corner, that's a big corner, right?
He's going to play at 200 pounds at OSU.
Correct. He'll be at 200 pounds at OSU, no doubt. 195, 200
and
pounds.
Probably 6'1.5".
Yeah. So, and he can run, obviously. So there's so many of these guys, unless you're a guy like the Downs kid that's going to OU that's 6'4", 6'5", 2 foot. You know what he is. He's a defensive end. Yeah. He's going to be a defensive end in college football.
Correct.
But these kids that are tweeners, that come out and they're 6 foot, 6'1", 205, 195.
Those are the kids OSU gets.
Well, think about it. Kentrell Brothers from Guthrie. Kentrell was 6 foot tall and weighed about 205 pounds when he came out of high school. And bingo bango, he's 6 foot tall and he weighs about 250 pounds, by the time he's out of Missouri. So, I mean, you just don't know.
I will say this, Kentrell would be at OSU right now. OSU is recruiting at a higher level when Kentrell came out. He would be at Oklahoma State right now. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know.
If you had to do it again.
Yeah, those are the those are the classes for the Oklahoma Sooners and the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Now, not every single player that plays in Oklahoma go to those schools. And let's take a look at some of those players that did sneak out of state here, high school students. Kendall Daniels, many believe, is the number 1 player out of the state of Oklahoma. Beggs High School at the Fighting Ryan Cottings, going to Texas A&M. Bryce Drummond, the quarterback that made the Husker to the state semifinals, eventually losing to Cash, and he's headed to North Texas. A.J. Green, the great running back at Tulsa Union, is going to Arkansas. We'll hear Arkansas a few times here. Kevin Green, defensive lineman from Del City, North Texas. Javion Hunt, the running back at Carl Albert, going to Arkansas. Chase Jackson, wide receiver, headed to TCU. He's the Choctaw wide receiver. Cameron Little, listed as the number 1 kicker in the nation in Southmore, Oklahoma. But Cameron Little didn't even play. His football coach asked him to come out. He was a soccer player. 2 years later, he's the number 1 kicker in the nation. But he's headed to Arkansas. Jeff Nwanko, wide receiver, Pump North, has headed to Tulane. Kewan Parker, defensive back from Tulsa, Washington, headed to Arkansas. Isaac Smith, defensive lineman from Wagner, the 4A state champions, going to Texas Tech. Bryce Stevens, wide receiver from John Marshall, is signed with Arkansas. Melvin Swindle, defensive lineman from Heritage Hall, signed with Eastern Michigan. Rajon Tatum, the linebacker at Dell City, headed to Boise State. Good recruiting there. Tevin Williams, defensive back from Stillwater. He sneaks out of Payne County, headed to Baylor. And then Solomon Wright, defensive lineman from Vian, who played in the state championship a year ago, headed to Arkansas. And Casey, your initial thoughts on the Oklahoma kids headed out of state?
Yeah, obviously, if you look at the last two on that list, those are the two most disappointing. You know, Tevin Williams has been nothing but an absolute multi-sport stud at Stillwater High School, right down the road from Oklahoma State, and he's slipping away to Baylor. Now, it's not unprecedented that Stillwater High School graduates end up going to Baylor to play football. If you remember John Martin in the mid-'90s, his dad Dave Martin was the associate AD for several years at Oklahoma State. His boy John played receiver at Baylor, so it's not unprecedented, but certainly very, very disappointing that Devin Williams is not going to play for Oklahoma State. And then Solomon Wright, the son of Kenyatta Wright, who is such a fantastic linebacker at Oklahoma State from Vian, Oklahoma, going to Arkansas. You know, and it's not like these guys are going to Division III schools. These kids are good enough to play at OSU. No doubt about it. If you're good enough to play at Baylor, if you're good enough to play at Arkansas, you are good enough to play at Oklahoma State. And Phil, I know you're going to fill in a lot of the dots with the Wagner kid and with Malcolm Rodriguez and the amount of success that he's had at Oklahoma State from Wagner. Isaac Smith's the kid's name. Disappointing to me that Oklahoma State allowed him to get away. Disappointing to me that when you look at that list, Oklahoma State has allowed Arkansas to invade Tulsa and really Eastern Oklahoma, for that matter, as much as they had. I've had a chance to see Kendall Daniels from Beggs. He's one of those kids that fit the profile. I mean, I think we'll have to wait and see. You know, it's a big step from Beggs to Texas A&M and SEC football. I think there's some things that are going to have to translate positively for him to have success at A&M, certainly immediately. Bryce Drummond, big kid. He looks like Ben Roethlisberger on a football field. He's able to run just enough to scramble around to throw the ball. A good arm, I wouldn't say just an absolute rocket for an arm, but a good enough arm. North Texas, I think, is probably a pretty good fit for him. And Javion Hunt from Carl Albert obviously didn't get a lot of the headlines from Carl Albert because you have Kentrell Bazell, you have Ben Harris, you have Colby Cruz, and you have all of these guys. Number 9, the receiver,
Curry.
I'm forgetting his last, Lamarion Curry. Yeah, you have all these guys that are tremendous football players, and then all of a sudden you forget that Javion Hunt is getting recruited to go to Arkansas to play defense, a position that side of the ball that he didn't even play in high school. So very disappointed that Oklahoma State allowed Arkansas such inroads in the Tulsa area, because those are the kids that Oklahoma State needs.
And you look at Phil, transition real quick, Kendall Daniels, arguably the number 1 player out of Oklahoma, defensive player, going to Texas A&M. Yeah. The last player who kind of comes to my mind was Dax Hill, the Booker T. Washington number 1 player in the state of Oklahoma, going to Michigan. So the top defensive player, top Oklahoma player going out of state.
Well, I will say this. Before I jump into this, I got to address one of our favorite Blue Jays for all three of us, Keaton Collins. Keaton. Yeah. We didn't forget about Ty Williams, believe me. We just talked about it. You just joined the show late. We spent a lot of time talking about Ty Williams. So Ty was definitely discussed. I shared our conversation about you telling me that he's the real deal, and we think he's going to be a big-time player at OSU. But saying that, I have a little more belief in the Daniels kid than Casey does. I think he is any scouting service you look at has Daniels ranked the number 1 player in the state of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. He's in every scouting service out there. They have him ranked 1 through 5 at safety in the entire nation. He's got offers from A&M, Alabama, Auburn, Baylor, Clemson, LSU, the who's who of college football programs. I'm going to put my trust that those cats see a kid that's 6'4", weighs 190 pounds, and runs about a 4.45 40, that they know what they're talking about. Now, there are those off the field things. There are those classroom things. There's moving away from home things. There's all kinds of things that play into it that could impact his ability on the field. And I think that's what Casey was really getting to. And I think things have to translate there. I get it. Beggs is a small school. But I could tell you from watching us getting to call the state championship games and being a part of the production of all the games the last 2 years here in Oklahoma, for every class with the exception of Class B.
Yeah.
What has really stood out to me is the people I thought I was going to be most impressed with, the big school kids, aren't the ones I'm most impressed with. I mean, the ones I'm most impressed with are the kids from the Wagners, the Beggs type schools, the Vians, those kids. There are big time football players playing in these small town schools that I think once they get over there, they're so athletic and they're so big and physical. The speed of the game's not going to overwhelm them, especially at a position like safety. I think that's a position that he'll be able to go in there and contribute early. I think, just like the kid from Booker T last year that went to Michigan that Chris was just referring to, the guy's playing as a true freshman, at Michigan. Now, I know Michigan's down this year, but boys, it's still Michigan and it's still the Big Ten. And, if you pick Texas A&M, a guy like Jimbo Fisher signs off on giving you a scholarship, you could play a little foosball, right? So, I think he's going to be a superstar. I will say, Chris, can you pop the list back up real quick for me?
Yeah.
I will say this, and it's going to sound like I'm going after this kid. I think the Javion Hunt kid, I'm surprised that he's going to an SEC school, to be quite honest, just my own personal opinion. I think, we've watched him a lot over the years, very, very good high school football player, but I think I've seen a lot of other people that I was much more impressed with. Definitely the kid out of Stillwater. We don't see his name anywhere on any list. All he did was run for what? 40,000 yards. Quantrell Walker. And my question is why is he not on here? Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that. Maybe he's going to need to go the JUCO route maybe he's going to need to go the JUCO route for a little bit. I think Quantrell's only 5'8", 5'7", 5'8". That's probably it. There was a guy out of Wichita, Kansas who was about 5'8" that turned out to be pretty good. His name was Barry Sanders. So the measurables aren't always right. And by no means am I saying that Quantrell Walker is going to be Barry Sanders. But what I am simply saying is sometimes this isn't an exact science. And you can put up these massive numbers. Go back to what we talked about to start the show. You can put up these massive, unbelievable, gaudy numbers and do it for 4 years. The kid ran for 1,500 yards at least every year of his high school career. Just a freak of nature. Nowhere on early signing day. And to be quite honest, I've seen him have no real Division I offers. So
why isn't he going to Tulsa?
Well, you got to offer him before you can go there.
I know, but why would they not want that kid?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It might be a deal where the young man needs to go the route of JUCO for whatever reason for a year or two. Who knows? There could be a variety of reasons, but I think when you look at the quality of the kids that got away, the Williams kid, I agree with at Baylor. The Smith kid, Isaac Smith, he is a 6'6", 240, played at Coweta, then for his freshman, sophomore year, then he went to Wagner's junior, senior year. He not only does he look the part on the hoof, he looks the part when the whistle blows. He's a player, Chris. I know that you remember him from this past weekend. If he wasn't making a tackle, he was disrupting everything in the backfield, or he was putting pressure on the quarterback, flushing people out. He's a force to be reckoned with. When you're 6'6" and you're athletic and you play defensive end, you're going to get a lot of offers and you're going to have an opportunity to be a player. Still comes down to does he fill out his body? There's no reason why he shouldn't. He'll probably be a kid that's 6'6", 265, 270 and can still run. He'll probably end up being a heck of a ball player for Texas Tech.